The dial tone was the most aggressive sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just a sound, it was a statement. It was a crisp, electronic severing of communication that said, "Our conversation is over because I have deemed it so, and your opinion is worth less than the lint in my pocket." I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the monotonous beep, beep, beep of utter dismissal. My blood was doing a slow, simmering boil. "Have a blessed day," she'd said, right before slamming the metaphorical door in my face. The sheer, weaponized pleasantry of it was breathtaking. It was the kind of parting shot a medieval queen might give before motioning for the royal executioner. I lowered the phone and stared out the window. The sky had been a sickly, bruised gray all afternoon, and now it was making good on its threat. Snowflakes, fat and heavy as wet cotton balls, were beginning to plaster themselves to the glass. This wasn't a gentle, picturesque dusting. This was the opening salvo of a meteorological siege. This was Snowpocalypse 2025, as the gleeful TV weather people had been calling it for the past 48 hours, and I, Alex, a 30-something project manager who prided himself on logic and efficiency, had just been excommunicated by the high priestess of Serenity Meadows Estates, Carol Peterson. The whole thing had started, as most modern disasters do, with an email. It had arrived an hour earlier, its subject line glowing with all the subtlety of a nuclear launch warning. Urgent. Official HOA directive regarding inclement weather. Serenity Meadows Estates. Even the title was classic Carol. Not a notice or an update. A directive. As if it had been handed down from on high, etched onto a stone tablet. I imagined her writing it in a dark room, illuminated only by a single bare bulb cackling as she typed. I had read it, my brow furrowing deeper with each line of corporate-speak legalese. It was a masterpiece of the genre, a dense tapestry of passive aggression and bureaucratic nonsense. "To all residents of Serenity Meadows Estates," it began, already setting a chilly, impersonal tone. In light of the severe weather forecast issued by the National Weather Service, and in the interest of preserving the integrity and value of our community's shared assets, the HOA Board has unanimously voted to enact Emergency Protocol 7C. This protocol dictates that the main vehicular entrance gate will be secured and locked promptly at 8 p.m. this evening, Tuesday, January 21st. I'd paused there, rereading the sentence. Locked? We were expecting 2 feet of snow. Locking the only way in or out seemed counterintuitive. But oh, there was a reason. Of course, there was a reason. This measure is necessary to prevent irreparable damage to the decorative stamped concrete entranceway and the delicate electronic gate mechanism. The harsh de-icing chemicals and heavy machinery associated with unauthorized third-party snow removal vendors represent a significant threat to our infrastructure. Please be assured that our community's designated and fully vetted contractor, Frosty's Friends Snow Removal, has been placed on notice and will service the entirety of Serenity Meadows in due course, following their standard operational timeline. Frosty's Friends. I snorted. Frosty was a 70-year-old man named Stan with a 1998 Ford Ranger and a rusty plow attachment. The last time it snowed 6 inches, in due course, meant my street wasn't touched for 2 days. Stan's standard operational timeline seemed to be based on the migratory patterns of geese. The problem was, most of us in the neighborhood weren't idiots. We knew Frosty's Friends was a joke, a low-bid contract Carol had secured because Stan was her second cousin, or something equally nepotistic. So, about half the subdivision, myself included, had a seasonal contract with a real professional outfit. Avalanche Annihilators. The name was a bit much, but their work was impeccable. They operated a fleet of brand-new trucks, and their motto was, "Cleared before your coffee's brewed." And Carol, in her infinite wisdom, was about to lock them out. That's when the stakes crystallized for me. My girlfriend, Sarah, was a registered nurse. She was finishing a double shift at the hospital and was due to go back in at 7 a.m. tomorrow. People's lives, actual human lives, depended on her being able to get to work. Her getting snowed in wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a genuine problem. I pulled out my phone and texted my next-door neighbor, Dave. He'd lived here for 20 years and was my resident expert on the local HOA insanity. Me. "You see Carol's latest email? Is she serious?" The reply came back almost instantly. "Dave, as a heart attack. She tried this back in 18. Called it Operation Snowflake Shield." It was a disaster. Old Man Hemlock slipped on his icy porch and broke his hip waiting for the ambulance that couldn't get through the unplowed street. Took them an extra 20 minutes to get to him. She doesn't care. To her, the rule is the point. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just stupid. It was dangerous. And that's when I'd decided to be an adult. I'd decided to call her. "Okay, Alex," I'd told myself, pacing my kitchen floor. Deep breaths. You're a project manager. You handle difficult stakeholders. She's just a stakeholder who's running on a potent cocktail of cheap Chardonnay and absolute power. You can do this. Be the calm, reasonable new guy. That had been my fatal flaw. I had assumed I was dealing with a rational human being. The memory of the phone call was still seared into my brain. I'd been polite, introducing myself, referencing the email, the directive, and explaining the situation calmly. I'd mentioned that many residents relied on a private service to get to their essential jobs. I'd even played the hero card, mentioning Sarah and the hospital. Her response had been a monotone recitation of HOA scripture. "That is an unfortunate personal situation, but it does not supersede community bylaws," she'd said, her voice like grinding gravel. "As per Bylaw 7, Section 4, Subsection B, all communal road maintenance must be performed by board-approved contractors." "With all due respect, Carol," I'd pressed, my calm facade starting to crack, "your approved contractor couldn't plow a sandbox with a spoon. This is a public safety issue. What if someone needs an ambulance?" "The fire department and emergency services have a master code for the electronic lock," she'd retorted, as if that solved everything. "The protocol is designed to prevent the riffraff." The riffraff. She meant the competent, well-equipped professionals we paid good money for. She meant Big Mike and his avalanche annihilators. And then had come the final, devastating blow. The "have a blessed day," followed by the click and the deafening dial tone. So there I stood, in my kitchen, the snow coming down harder now, the world outside turning a blurry, ominous white. The diplomatic approach had failed. The reasonable new guy had been summarily executed. Fine. The war had just been declared. And if Carol thought a locked gate and a few lines in a binder were going to stop me, she had no idea who she was dealing with. My project manager brain, the part of me that lived for Gantt charts and risk mitigation, started to whir. Every problem had a solution, every system had a vulnerability, and every petty tyrant had an ego, which was usually their biggest weakness. No more Mr. Reasonable New Guy. It was time to find a loophole. Defeated in single combat, I turned to the next logical arena for modern warfare: the neighborhood Facebook group. The Serenity Meadows Neighbors page was usually a sleepy corner of the internet, populated by posts about lost cats, recommendations for plumbers, and passive-aggressive complaints about people not picking up after their dogs. Tonight, it was about to become a war room. I spent a full 10 minutes composing my post. It needed to be the perfect blend of concerned neighbor and righteous indignation, without tipping over into the kind of frantic ranting that would get me dismissed as a crank. I chose a picture of the worsening snowstorm outside my window for dramatic effect. "Hi, neighbors," I typed. Alex here from 112 Juniper Lane. Hope everyone is staying safe and warm. I wanted to open a discussion about the HOA directive to lock the main gate at 8 p.m. I'm sure we all appreciate the board's desire to protect our shared infrastructure, but I'm concerned this could have some serious unintended consequences. I laid it all out. The unreliability of Frosty's friends, the fact that many of us had prepaid for private services, and the critical need for residents, especially those with essential jobs like doctors, nurses, and first responders, to be able to get out in the morning. I finished with a call for unity. Perhaps we can find a compromise that keeps everyone safe and ensures our roads are cleared efficiently. I'm sure if we put our heads together, we can work with the board to find a solution. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. I hit post and leaned back, cracking my knuckles. It was polite, it was reasonable. It was a digital olive branch. It was promptly set on fire. The first comment appeared in under 30 seconds. It was from a woman named Sharon Hill. "Thank you for saying something, Alex. My husband is a pilot and is on call. This is completely unacceptable." Then another. "I remember the Hemlock incident in 18. This is dangerously irresponsible. I'm with Alex." A wave of support washed over the post. People shared their own stories. A diabetic neighbor worried about getting to a dialysis appointment. A young mother with a baby who was terrified of being trapped. For a moment, I felt a swell of pride. Community in action, the little people standing up to the powers that be. And then the loyalists arrived. The sycophants. Carol's Praetorian Guard. The first shot was fired by a woman named Brenda from down the street, whose profile picture was a blurry photo of a garden gnome. "Carol is just trying to protect our property values, which some of you seem to take for granted. The rules are the rules for a reason. Maybe you should have read the bylaws before you bought your house." Another chimed in. "I trust the board's judgment. Frosty's Friends has always done a fine job for me. Some people are just entitled." The comment section devolved into a digital civil war. Accusations flew, insults were hurled. The Hemlock incident was relitigated. Brenda accused Sharon's pilot husband of causing noise pollution. It was chaos. For about 15 glorious, anarchic minutes, the residents of Serenity Meadows aired every grievance they'd ever had. And then the hammer fell. A new comment appeared, and the page fell silent. It was from the Queen herself, Carol Peterson. Her profile picture was a stern, tightly cropped headshot that looked like it had been taken at the DMV. "This matter is now closed," she wrote, her words radiating an icy finality. "The safety and preservation of our community's valuable infrastructure is my top priority, a responsibility I take with the utmost seriousness. This public forum is not the appropriate venue for debating official and binding HOA policy. The board's decision, which was reached after careful consideration, is final. Further public dissent on this platform will be noted. The gate will be locked at 8 p.m. sharp." And then, the master stroke. Below her comment, a small gray line appeared. "Carol Peterson has turned off commenting for this post." The digital guillotine. She had swooped in, had the last word, and silenced everyone. The sheer audacity was stunning. Further dissent will be noted. What was she going to do? Give me a demerit? Send me to my room with no supper? I stared at the screen. My hands clenched into fists on my desk. My laptop was lucky I didn't hurl it through the drywall. That was it. That was the moment my entire mindset shifted. I was no longer a concerned neighbor seeking compromise. I was a prisoner of war planning a jailbreak. My respect for the rules had been met with tyranny, and my attempt at diplomacy had been squashed with a digital jackboot. Fine. If Carol wanted to play by the book, I'd find a chapter she'd never even read. My anger, hot and useless, began to cool and solidify into something else: focus. The project manager in me took over. shoving the indignant homeowner aside. Every complex system has a workaround. Every fortress has a forgotten back door. I wasn't just dealing with a person anymore, I was dealing with a flawed system, and I knew how to deal with those. I minimized the Facebook tab and pulled up the digital plot map of the subdivision that had been buried in the mountain of paperwork I'd received when I bought the house. It was a boring, technical PDF showing property lines, utility easements, and topographical data. I zoomed in on the main entrance, a choke point controlled by one electronic gate. A single point of failure. It was a terrible design. My eyes traced the perimeter of the subdivision. The main road, Serenity Lane, snaked through the development. Houses, cul-de-sacs, a small parquet with a sad-looking gazebo. And then I saw it. On the far northeast corner of the property, mostly obscured by a green-tinted area labeled Natural Preserve, was a thin, dashed line. It was labeled Utility and Emergency Access Road. My heart gave a little thump. The dashed line connected the back of a cul-de-sac on Celestial Court to a small, unassuming side street called Mill Road, a street that was entirely outside of Carroll's jurisdiction. It was a relic, likely used for construction vehicles when they first built the neighborhood 25 years ago, and then forgotten by all but the city planners. But it was there on the map. It was an official access point. It was our way out. I threw on my heaviest coat, pulled on my snow boots, and told Sarah I was going for a walk. She gave me a look that said, "In this weather? Are you insane?" "I'm just checking something," I said, a grim smile on my face. "Call it a site survey." The wind was brutal, driving pellets of snow into my face. The 5-minute walk to Celestial Court felt like an Arctic expedition. I trudged through the rapidly deepening snow, my boots sinking almost to my shins. The world was a swirl of white and gray. The houses already looking like frosted gingerbread creations. At the very end of the cul-de-sac, behind a thicket of snow-laden pine trees, I found it. It wasn't much to look at. A simple, 10-foot-wide chain-link gate, rusty at the hinges. It was stretched between two metal poles set in concrete. It was undeniably old, but it was structurally sound, and holding it closed wasn't some fancy electronic lock or an official HOA-branded device. It was just a thick, greasy-looking length of chain, woven through the fence and secured with a massive, industrial-grade padlock that looked like it belonged on a shipping container. I leaned against the fence, the cold metal biting through my gloves. My breath plumed in the air. Well, 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 I thought, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across my face. What do we have here? Carol was so obsessed with polishing the ceremonial front door that she'd completely forgotten to lock the service entrance. This was a classic logistics screw-up. She had secured the primary ingress point, but had left the secondary route completely vulnerable. It was amateur hour. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold, and took a few pictures of the gate, the chain, and the padlock. Then I trudged back home. The wind at my back now, a brilliant, beautiful, and slightly illegal plan blossoming in my mind. Back in the warmth of my house, I poured myself a generous measure of bourbon and sat down at my desk. I pulled up the contact info for avalanche annihilators. It was time to call in the cavalry. A man's voice, deep and gravelly like a rock tumbler, answered on the second ring. "Avalanche, Mike speaking. Mike, it's Alex Miller from 112 Juniper Lane in Serenity Meadows. We have a situation." There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "Let me guess. The Dragon Lady is locking the main gate again." I blinked. "You know her?" A short, bitter laugh crackled through the phone. "Buddy, every plow guy in a 50-mile radius knows about Queen Carol. We call her the gatekeeper. She's famous. So, we're locked out for the night?" She's locking the main gate at 8 p.m. sharp, I confirmed. But I think I found a back door, a service entrance on the northeast side of the neighborhood. The only thing blocking it is a chain with a big, ugly padlock. You guys have bolt cutters on your trucks, right? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Then, a slow, deep chuckle started, building into a full-throated laugh. "Kid, I like the way you think," Big Mike said, his voice full of newfound respect. "I like it a lot. My guys are just finishing up a commercial lot over on the west side. I can pull them off that. And you know what? I know a couple of independent guys, good operators, who are sick to death of her too. They'd probably do this for free just for the story." My grin widened. This was better than I'd hoped. "What if I told you," Mike continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "that I could have a fleet of 4 Plows, my 2 biggest trucks and 2 of my buddies, sitting at that service entrance at 8:05 p.m.? "I'd say you're about to become a local legend, Mike," I replied, my heart hammering with excitement. "All right then," Big Mike declared, his voice booming with purpose. "Operation Thunderplow is a go. Text me the location of that gate. We're gonna liberate Serenity Meadows." I hung up the phone, the bourbon warming my chest, and a feeling of pure, unadulterated glee washing over me. The game was on. By 7:50 p.m., the world outside was a churning vortex of white. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and the snow was coming down so thick you couldn't see the streetlights. It was perfect. The storm would provide the chaos and cover we needed. I told Sarah the plan. She looked at me, a mixture of horror and amusement in her eyes. "You're going to break into our own neighborhood with a fleet of renegade snowplows?" "It's not breaking in if you live here," I argued. "It's creative problem-solving. Think of me as a freedom fighter, but for asphalt." She just shook her head, smiling. "Okay, Che Guevara. Just don't get arrested. I can't bail you out until my shift ends." "Noted." I bundled up, this time adding a ski mask to my ensemble, less for anonymity and more because the wind felt like it was full of tiny needles. For my casual dog walk, I leashed up Buster, my golden retriever, who took one look out the door, gave me a look of profound betrayal, and promptly tried to retreat to his bed. "Come on, boy," I coaxed him. "You're part of the revolution now." He was not impressed. I practically had to drag him down the driveway. We positioned ourselves near the main entrance, hiding behind a large, snow-covered decorative boulder, pretending Buster was intensely interested in a specific patch of buried grass. From our vantage point, we had a clear view of both the gate and Carol's house, number 1 Serenity Lane, situated directly across from the entrance like a guard tower. At 8 p.m. on the dot, as if cued by a Swiss clock, her front door opened. A figure emerged, clad head to toe in a fluorescent yellow parka that screamed, "I am in charge." It was Carol. She marched through the snow with a determined, militaristic gait, a woman on a holy mission. She went to the electronic keypad, punched in a code, and the large wrought iron gates slowly groaned shut, the finality of the sound echoing in the quiet storm. But she wasn't done. Oh no, that would be too simple. From the cavernous pocket of her parka, she produced an object that glinted under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. It was a padlock. Not just any padlock. It was a comically large, bright red monstrosity, the kind of thing Wile E. Coyote would use to try and lock up the Roadrunner. With great ceremony, she threaded it through the gate's manual override chain and snapped it shut. She gave it a theatrical, two-handed tug to demonstrate its unyielding strength. Even from 50 feet away, through a blizzard, I could feel the smugness radiating off her. I decided to give her the audience she so clearly craved. "Evening, Carol!" I shouted over the wind, stepping out from behind the rock. Buster cowered behind my legs. "Little redundant, isn't it? The electronic lock wasn't enough for you." She visibly startled, squinting into the darkness to identify the source of the voice. "Alex," she spat, her name a curse on the wind. "This ensures there is no ambiguity. The directive is now physically enforced." "You realize you're trapping people in, right?" I yelled back, taking a step closer. "What about emergencies? What if someone needs to get out?" "The fire department has a code for the electronic lock," she recited, her voice a strained shout. "This is to prevent the riffraff." She glared at me, the unspoken "you" hanging heavy and frozen in the air between us. I just smiled. A thin, cold smile she probably couldn't see through the swirling snow. "Okay, Carol. Just wanted to be clear." I gave a subtle nod. Across the street, a curtain in Dave's living room window twitched. He was my lookout. He flashed his porch light once, all clear. Carol was so focused on me, the designated rebel, and on her precious front gate, that she had no idea what was about to happen. Her trap was set, but she had caught the wrong animal. "Come on, Buster," I said, turning my back on her. "Let's go home." I walked away at a deliberately calm pace, a man with absolutely nothing to hide. The moment I was out of her sightline, I broke into a dead sprint, Buster bounding gleefully through the deep snow alongside me. We cut through backyards, a gorilla and his four-legged commando, making our way to the rendezvous point. I arrived at the utility access road on Celestial Court at 8:03 p.m., panting and covered in snow. For a second, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. And then I saw them. Through the whiteout, a pair of headlights appeared, then another and another and another. One by one, 4 massive trucks rumbled up the quiet side street and came to a stop, their diesel engines a low, powerful thrum that was music to my ears. They were beautiful. 3 were heavy-duty pickups with huge plows and salt spreaders, their amber emergency lights strobing in the blizzard. The 4th was a larger, municipal-style dump truck with a plow blade that looked like it could shear the top off a mountain. The door of the lead truck, a Ford F-350 with avalanche annihilators emblazoned on the side in aggressive, icy blue letters, swung open. A large figure hopped down. It was Big Mike, a mountain of a man in a Carhartt jacket, his beard already frosted with ice. He was holding the largest pair of bolt cutters I had ever seen. They were at least 4 feet long. He strode towards me, grinning. "You bring the problem," he boomed, holding up the cutters like a trophy. "I bring the solution. You ready to do this, kid?" "Born ready, Mike," I said, my own grin feeling like it might freeze to my face. "Let's go liberate Serenity Meadows." He didn't need any more encouragement. He marched to the rusty gate, positioned the jaws of the cutters around the thickest part of the chain, and clamped down. For a second, there was only the sound of creaking metal. Mike grunted, putting his whole body into it. Then, with a single, deafening snip, the chain link gave way. The broken ends clattered uselessly against the fence posts. The gate was open. Mike turned to me, his eyes twinkling in the flashing lights. He gestured grandly toward the now unblocked road. It had been, maybe 2 minutes since Carol locked the main gate. And here I was. I stood aside, made a sweeping after-you gesture with my arm, and led in a fleet of plows. Mike jumped back in his truck and keyed his radio, his voice crackling with static and glee. "All right, boys, the Eagle has landed. We are green-lit. Let's go make some money and tick off a tyrant." One by one, the 4 horsemen of the snowpocalypse roared past me, their tires churning, and descended into the snow-choked streets of my neighborhood. Operation Thunderplow had begun. The symphony started immediately. It was a glorious, roaring concert of diesel engines, scraping steel, and the rhythmic beeping of trucks in reverse. Big Mike and his crew weren't just plowing, They were executing a coordinated assault. They moved with the kind of military precision that would have made a 5-star general weep with joy. They split up. The 2 larger pickups took the main artery, Serenity Lane, one clearing the right side, the other the left, moving in perfect echelon formation. The dump truck, the behemoth of the fleet, tackled the wide intersection near the entrance. The 3rd pickup, a nimble-looking Dodge Ram, started on the cul-de-sacs, darting in, clearing them with a few deft passes, and darting back out. Huge arcs of snow, brilliantly illuminated by the flashing strobe lights, were flung into the air, landing in neat, uniform piles on the lawns. This wasn't the sloppy, haphazard work of Frosty's friends. This was art. This was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was like watching the Blue Angels, but for disgruntled suburbanites. Every scrape of those heavy plows on the asphalt was a tiny, screeching victory for common sense. I stood there for a long moment, just watching them work, a feeling of deep, profound satisfaction warming me more than my insulated coat. Then I started the walk home, taking the freshly cleared path down the middle of the street like a returning king. The noise, of course, did not go unnoticed. As the dump truck began clearing the road in front of Carol's house, her porch light flicked on. The silhouette of a figure in a fluorescent yellow parka appeared behind the storm door. She stood there for a second, a frozen statue of disbelief. Then the door was flung open. She came out onto her porch, pointing. She was screaming, her mouth opening and closing, but the sound was completely swallowed by the roar of the Cummins engine and the grinding of the plow blade. It was like watching a silent movie, a very, very angry silent movie. She waved her arms frantically, but the driver, a large man in a beanie, gave her a cheerful little wave and continued his work, expertly piling a mountain of snow near the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn. Seeing that her shrieks were useless, Carol retreated back inside. A few seconds later, the lights in her upstairs office window flicked on. I could picture it perfectly, her fumbling for her phone, her fingers trembling with rage as she dialed 911. I could practically write the transcript of the call myself. "There's a gang of hooligans in enormous trucks. They're vandalizing the neighborhood with cleanliness. They're trespassing and providing a contracted service. Send everyone. Send the SWAT team. Send the National Guard." I had just made it back to my driveway when the first set of blue and red lights sliced through the blizzard. A single police cruiser, moving cautiously on the slick roads, pulled into the main cul-de-sac where the plows were now converging to finish the job. Showtime. I sauntered over, hands casually in my pockets, and leaned against the grill of Big Mike's F-350. He killed the engine and hopped out, wiping his hands on a rag. The other drivers did the same. The sudden quiet was almost as jarring as the noise had been. A young officer, looking like he was barely old enough to shave, got out of his car. His name tag read Miller. He had his hand resting on his sidearm, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. 4 massive plow trucks, 4 burly-looking men, and one very calm, smiling guy in a ski mask. Oh, right. I pulled the mask off. Just then, Carol came sprinting, or rather, waddling as fast as she could through the deep snow on the lawn, towards the officer. "Officer! Officer! Thank God!" she shrieked, her voice hoarse. "That's him! He's the ringleader!" She pointed a trembling, mitten-clad finger directly at me. "He cut the HOA lock and let this biker gang in. They're trespassing. Vandalism, malicious destruction of property." Officer Miller looked from her hysterical face to my calm one, his expression a perfect mask of confusion. "Sir," he said to me, his voice cautious, "I'm going to need you to explain what's going on here." "Evening, officer," I said, my voice relaxed and friendly. My name is Alex Miller. This gentleman here is Big Mike, owner of Avalanche Annihilators, a fully licensed and insured snow removal company. I gestured to Mike, who gave a gruff nod. We, along with about 30 other homeowners in this subdivision, have a contract with his company to clear our streets. It's a matter of public safety. Many of our residents are essential workers who need to be able to leave in the morning. He's lying, Carol screeched. They are not authorized. The HOA president, Miss Peterson over there, I continued, my voice overriding hers, decided to physically lock the one and only entrance to the neighborhood, trapping all 200 residents inside during a state-declared weather emergency. She created a massive public safety hazard. It's not illegal, it's in the bylaws. Show him the bylaws. Carol was practically dancing with rage. Officer Miller looked like his brain was about to short-circuit. He was a kid caught between a screaming woman quoting arcane rules and a calm guy talking about public safety. He was clearly out of his depth. And then Salvation arrived in a second police cruiser. This one pulled up quietly behind the first. A much older, more seasoned officer got out. He had a graying mustache that had clearly seen its share of blizzards and neighborhood disputes. His name tag read Davis. He walked over with the unhurried gait of a man who was on the back nine of his career and had zero patience for nonsense. "What we got here, Miller?" he asked, his voice a low, tired rumble. Seems to be a civil dispute, Sarge," Miller reported, looking relieved. "HOA rules versus a private contractor." Sergeant Davis cut him off with a raised hand. He ignored me completely. He ignored the trucks. He fixed his gaze directly on Carol. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Are you the individual who called 911 to report a snowplow doing its job during a blizzard?" The way he said it made it sound like the stupidest sentence ever uttered in human history. "They are not authorized," Carol insisted, her voice cracking. "He cut a lock. They trespassed." "Ma'am," Sergeant Davis said, taking a slow step closer to her, "let me be very clear. You cannot physically lock hundreds of people in their homes during a state of emergency. That borders on unlawful imprisonment. These gentlemen," he gestured to us, "are providing an essential service that allows citizens to get to hospitals and fire stations, and, you know, their jobs. You, on the other hand, are wasting valuable and limited police resources on a night when there are actual emergencies happening. Go home. Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every word was a lead weight. "But the decorative concrete?" Carol stammered, her last line of defense. "I don't care about your decorative concrete, ma'am," the sergeant said, his patience finally snapping. "I care about the ambulance that might need to get down this street. Now go home. If I have to come back here tonight, it won't be to talk to him." He jerked a thumb in my direction. Carol stood there, sputtering, her face a crumpled mask of pure, impotent rage. Defeated, she turned without another word and trudged back to her house, her bright yellow parka a beacon of humiliation in the swirling snow. Sergeant Davis watched her go. Then he turned to me. He looked at the perfectly cleared street, then at the trucks, then at me. A tiny glimmer of a smile touched the corners of his mustache. He gave me a single curt nod. "Looks good. Get it done and get out of here. Try not to make a habit of this." "Yes, sir," I said, a massive grin spreading across my face. He and Miller got back in their cars and drove away, their lights disappearing into the storm. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Big Mike let out a huge laugh and slapped me hard on the back, nearly sending me face first into the snow. "Operation Thunderplow," he roared, "is a complete success." The next morning, the world was transformed. The storm had broken, and a brilliant cold sun shone down from a painfully blue sky. It glinted off at least 2 feet of fresh, untouched powder that blanketed every roof and lawn, turning Serenity Meadows into a pristine winter wonderland. Everywhere, that is, except for the roads. Our roads were beautiful, black, and bone-dry, steaming slightly in the morning chill. It looked like a special effect, a perfectly clear path carved through a wilderness of snow. Sarah had left for the hospital at 6:30 a.m. without so much as a slip of her tires. Mission accomplished. As I was outside with a shovel, clearing my own walkway, the neighborhood began to stir. Doors opened. People emerged, blinking in the bright sunlight, expecting to be entombed. Instead, they were greeted by freedom. First, Dave came over from next door, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to me. It was coffee, strong and black. "You did it, you magnificent bastard," he said, shaking his head in awe as he surveyed the clear street. "You actually did it. I watched the whole thing from my window. It was better than Netflix." "Just a little creative problem-solving," I said with a shrug, trying to sound humble and failing miserably. Then Mrs. Gable from across the street, an elderly woman who rarely left her house, shuffled over. She was holding a plate of what looked like still warm chocolate chip cookies. "Young man," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have a cardiologist appointment this morning that I absolutely could not miss. Thank you. Thank you so much." One by one, they came out. People I'd only ever waved to brought me donuts. They gave me thumbs-ups. They called me a hero. It was deeply uncomfortable and utterly fantastic. I was the William Wallace of suburban snow removal. The best part, the true cherry on top of this sundae of petty victory, was the masterpiece Big Mike's crew had left behind. As a final, parting gift, they had taken all the snow from the central cul-de-sac and piled it into a single, massive, densely packed snowbank. A snowbank that stood at least 8 feet high and was positioned perfectly at the end of Carol Peterson's driveway, completely and utterly blocking in her pristine white Lexus SUV. It wasn't just a pile of snow, it was a sculpture, a monument to her defeat. She wouldn't be going anywhere for a while. Not without hiring Stan and his Frosty's friends pickup to spend half a day chipping away at it. The irony was so thick you could taste it. The fallout was swift. An emergency HOA meeting was called via Zoom that Saturday. The story of Plowgate, as it was now being called, had spread like wildfire. Dave gave me a play-by-play via text. Apparently, Carol tried to defend herself, waving a copy of the bylaws at her webcam and ranting about infrastructure and unauthorized vendors. But no one was listening. They had tasted freedom. A vote of no confidence was called. The result was a landslide. Carol Peterson was officially removed from her position as HOA president. Her reign of terror was over. The bylaw about authorized contractors was the first one on the chopping block at the next meeting. The following Monday, I was sitting in my home office, sipping my coffee and enjoying the view of my liberated neighborhood, when a new email popped into my inbox. It was from the newly appointed interim HOA board. The subject line read, "An invitation to run for HOA president." I stared at it for a long moment. I pictured myself sitting in meetings, debating the merits of different shades of beige for mailbox posts, fielding complaints about overgrown hedges. I pictured becoming the very thing I had fought against. I snorted. A loud, undignified laugh that made Buster lift his head from his bed. Then, with a single, satisfying click, I moved the email into the trash folder. Yeah, right. I solved one problem. I wasn't about to make it my full-time job. Some dragons are best slain just once. Besides, I think I'll just stick to reading the fine print and keeping a good pair of bolt cutters in the garage. You know, just in case.